Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon if you're joining us from Ukraine. My name is Damon Wilson. I'm Executive Vice President here at the Atlantic Council. I'm delighted to welcome you to our webcast conversation with Ukraine's Deputy Foreign Minister, Danylo Lubkivsky. We're delighted to welcome the Deputy Foreign Minister to this conversation after having recently hosted him in Washington here at our headquarters and after meeting first days after he assumed his position in Kyiv just a few weeks ago. Our conversation today, which will be brief, has a moment to be able to focus on the diplomatic front in Ukraine. What is the Ukrainian government's reaction to President Putin's latest gambit, discussing the referenda, and the situation, of course, in eastern and southern Ukraine? We'll be speaking with a seasoned diplomat. Minister Lubkivsky is Deputy Foreign Minister who assumed that position in the aftermath of the Euromaidan protests. His brief includes information policy, public diplomacy. He served his nation at the United Nations, and he was a former advisor to President Viktor Yushchenko. So with that brief introduction, let me turn it over to our guest. I think we've got about 25 minutes, and he'll make an opening comment about the current situation in Ukraine, and then we'll take all of our viewers' questions. If they could submit questions to #ACUkraine. That's #ACUkraine. Over Twitter, we'll be delighted to convey your questions to the minister here. So please, over to you, Minister Lubkivsky.
Damon, I do thank you very much for this kind introduction and for the invitation. I do remember our meetings in Washington, and I was really pleased by the hospitality I felt, and I do recognize and do realize that that was the atmosphere that our bilateral cooperation enjoys. That's very important for us, for our nation, to feel that we have good, strong partners outside, and the United States among our partners. Thank you for the introduction. Since I'm dealing with information, public diplomacy, I have also this very special duty to deal with our political issues as well. So I would be happy to respond to your questions, to answer your question in the way that I can do it, and I will be happy to share with you the latest news or our positions, our stance on the recent developments. So if you permit, I will start by this, and I will invite everybody to start asking questions on these recent developments. So you're welcome.
Okay, terrific. So for those viewers, you can submit questions now to #ACUkraine, #ACUkraine. Mr. Minister, let me start off with your brief on the information war, the propaganda issues. Obviously, for those watching Russian television, they're seeing a very clear narrative. We've seen a lot of reports now out on Russian media of Ukrainian forces shooting at Ukrainian civilians. Give us a sense, if you can, of how your government sees the information side of the struggle that's playing out in your country or over your country, how you are handling that, how you see Russia's approach, what your response is, and then if you could specifically address these allegations of Ukrainian soldiers shooting Ukrainian civilians that we've seen on some Russian television stations today.
I do thank you for this question, because this is a fundamental one. I can talk for hours about that. But the matter is very, very important. Let me start by saying that we've been thinking about this propaganda war waged by Russia against Ukraine, and we were looking for some responses or approaches, I would say, that may help to stand against this enormous scale of propaganda of the Russian authorities against Ukraine. And I will tell you that there is only one and the major response to that. And that was a principal thing that united all people in the cabinet, and as well and united our team here at the Foreign Ministry. The point is that we have no other options but to tell truth, and this is our response. Only by saying objective information, recognizing our mistakes, but saying about our achievements as well, may help people to see the difference between Russian propaganda and the information which comes from Kyiv. That was our, principal idea, and that was the point that we kept in mind while elaborating our first responses to the first wave of Russian propaganda against Ukraine. But what do I mean by this? What threats we see, and what we have to and where should we focus our attention? Let me start from I will say from the first basket. The first basket, or the first audience, is our own Ukrainian audience. For years there was no real national dialogue inside the country, and even if it's not the competence of the foreign ministry, but as we are the part of the government, we have to do everything possible to ensure that real dialogue between Ukrainians inside the country. And that's a principal thing for us, because I will tell you that just a few hours ago I had a good conversation with people in Luhansk, a private one, and I felt that there is a very strong request they are sending to our government to hear them. And I think that's a very natural thing. We have to hear them, and we will to hear them. The biggest problem in these terms is the security threat, which is sponsored by the Russian authorities, by Russian special agents and subversive groups and terrorists. Let me say that, and let me start from very important, vital point. There is no civil war in Ukraine. Ukraine is not in flames, but definitely there are terrorist groups in some locations in the south and east of Ukraine that undermine our security, and they possess an enormous threat to our people, and we have to protect our people. Every country will do the same if there is a threat against its own citizens. So that's the first audience. We have to establish this dialogue, even along with our fight against international terrorism that was sponsored and inspired from outside. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that we are happy to feel that solidarity atmosphere and support coming from our Western European and American partners. But obviously we do realize that people in the West, they share good feelings, and they support Ukraine in these dramatic times, but obviously and definitely much should be done to enlarge the knowledge about Ukraine. What is Ukraine? What's the difference between Ukrainians and Russians, for instance? What's the contribution of Ukraine into the world history, affairs, culture, and so on? A lot of questions that are not really known for that people. And we have really good, strong story to be told about Ukraine. That's a Shakespeare-style story, and we are going to tell that. And the third audience that we are looking for, and we are looking with good feelings, this is Russian audience. We know that our friends in Russia, unfortunately, they've been poisoned by this Russian propaganda for years. And that poison ruined their perception of relations between Ukrainians and Russians. We have to tell them also very important story about the independent Ukrainian nations. And that's a very important thing. They have to recognize that Ukrainians are independent nation. They have to change this very complicated psychological drama that they feel that burden right now. So let me stop by that, because I can talk for hours about that.
Please. Mr. Minister, let me bring us up to what's happening right now in current events. Yesterday in Moscow, President Putin, with the chairman in office of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, who is right now the Swiss president, standing by his side, made a statement that took some by surprise in the West, looking as if he was stepping back from the call for an independence referendum in Donetsk this weekend, perhaps leaning in and signaling potential support for Ukraine's elections on May 25th. But we're hearing out of the separatists today in Donbass that they intend to conduct their referendum on Sunday. So what do you expect to happen Sunday? Will your government take active steps to prevent an attempt to have a vote this weekend? And how do you assess what President Putin's strategy is? What he meant? What do you make of his statements yesterday?
Thank you. First of all, Russia taught all of us a very good lesson. That its lesson sounds as follows: we cannot simply trust their words. That's why we consider yesterday's statements that these statements should be proved by real actions. Unfortunately, despite a front of some kind of the good faith gesture, the content and rhetoric that were voiced at the Kremlin have nothing in common with true search of a settlement. Discussion of the peaceful settlement in Ukraine, but without Ukraine, is completely senseless, and it is not acceptable. This is unacceptable. We have, instead of statements, the whole international community looks for real actions. And let me say what real actions we expect. First of all, Russia should implement its obligations assumed under Geneva Agreement, meaning that they have to distance themselves from terrorist groups in the south and east. They have publicly called upon these forces, these separatist factions, to lay down their arms and to free buildings. And also, they have to cease actions by the subversive groups. The second thing is that we demand withdrawal of Russian armed forces from Ukrainian borders, and that withdrawal should be genuinely confirmed. As I told you, we cannot trust their words, simply remembering the recent developments in the Crimea. And getting to your question about that so-called terrorist referenda, they are illegal, and of course there are no conditions for anybody there to hold these kind of activities. Saying that this is not that these referenda are illegal, I'm sure that there is no much sense about these actions that may be conducted by some isolated groups. No result of that. But as you remember, yesterday President Putin said that they have called those groups to postpone these illegal referenda. We do not accept this because this appeal to postpone is just a mockery, and by no means this is not a sign of goodwill. And such scenario Russia has already implemented in the Crimea. And another thing is, and let me finish with that, that Russians have to stop substitution of notions. There is no civil war in Ukraine. The essence of the conflict is the aggression of the Russian Federation against Ukraine, occupation of the Crimea, and impudent interference in our internal affairs, accompanied by support for terrorist actions against Ukrainian citizens and territorial integrity of our country. There is no civil war. There is an act of aggression done by Russia.
Your message is loud and clear. Minister Lubkivsky, let me move on to the next question. Let me remind our viewers as well, again, if you have a question, you can submit it over Twitter at #ACUkraine. Ukraine, hashtag AC Ukraine. You can also email us a question at press@atlanticcouncil.org, all one word. I forgot to credit Irene Halupa, former head of Ukrainian service at RFERL, now editor of Ukraine Alert here at the Atlantic Council, for the previous question. The next question comes from Rob Pulse News, is the handle. Does Ukraine's military have enough loyal members in order to maintain Ukrainian sovereignty in the east of the country? Can you rely on sufficient number of Ukrainian forces to actually protect your sovereignty?
Yes, we have. Yes, they have. And, you know, I'm proud of our armed forces. There are a lot of patriots that will fight for Ukraine's independence, and a lot of patriots and a lot of Ukrainian officers who will defend our motherland against any threat. So, yes, we do rely on them. But we also do understand that we have to do everything possible to avoid any kind of conflict. And, you know, I'm speaking this as the Ukrainian patriot, but also as the diplomat. You know, that's part of my psychology and my philosophy. We have to do everything possible to avoid any casualties, bloodshed, you know, to stop this madness which has been done by the Russian authorities. So that's the principal things for us, for the Ukrainian diplomats, to do everything possible to get all parties to the negotiation table. And our position is very open and clear. We are going to talk. We are going to convince Russians to stop their madness, to stop what they are doing, to get back to the civilized relationship, and to find solutions. How they can, you know, what they can do about that. I will say the most tragic mistake in their history, as they occupied the Crimea. Crimea is Ukrainian territory, and the Crimea will get back to Ukraine.
Mr. Minister, the next question relates to your service at the United Nations, representing your country in the past. From Dean Bain, asking, do you agree it's time for the United Nations to show more resolve on Ukraine and push back on this issue of Russian aggression, demand withdrawal from Crimea? You served Ukraine at the United Nations. What role do you see, helpfully or unhelpfully, the UN Security Council, UN General Assembly playing on your country right now?
Let me say that I do belong to the United Nations family. That's why I know all positive, very good sides of our world organization, as well as I'm aware about a lot of difficulties that our organization experiences while providing peaceful settlement for conflicts, trying to ensure peace and stability all over the world. And that mission is very important, crucial in the 21st century as well, including the strategic goals of the United Nations. So I do believe that it's high time for the United Nations to provide more efforts under these conditions. I do believe that it may be of use to think about more political presence of the United Nations representatives here in Ukraine. But of course, all these issues should be considered very, very carefully, with wisdom, because the most important thing is to have a good, strong results, not only efforts but results. You know, we have to be result-oriented in this case. That's why that was very important that Deputy Secretary General visited Ukraine yesterday, and as I was informed, there were good results of his meetings. We are in constant touch, and we do believe that there is a room for very constructive contribution to be done by the United Nations in order to provide and to ensure and strengthen peace and security in our region. United Nations, we are among those countries that were the founding fathers of this organization. That's why this mission is the part of our heart as well. So I do understand these difficulties that the United Nations may face, but I do believe that the mission that the United Nations have, that mission is of enormous scale, which is very important for all nations, including Ukrainians.
That's right. Thank you. Even as Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union, it did have its own voice and seat.
Yeah, that was very interesting. You know, beginning of, or I would say not the beginning, but the continuation of Ukrainian diplomacy, which is going from the early days of 20th century.
That's right. In the closing minutes, I've got two more questions I want to try to work in, if I may, Mr. Minister. From Eric Bratberg, a Swedish citizen based here in Washington. What kind of military aid would you like to see from the West in the short and the long term?
Let me say that, first of all, we appreciate all the assistance that have been already provided for Ukraine, but also that we appreciate and we look forward to enhancing this kind of cooperation. A lot of people are asking me about some specific moments in the on this agenda. Let me say, as a diplomat, I'm doing everything possible together with my colleagues here at the Foreign Ministry to provide and to ensure peaceful settlement. We are thinking that's our priority task, to do everything possible to have this peaceful settlement. But obviously, we do understand that we are not alone under these conditions, and we are happy that, and we look forward to have some good prospects of increasing this solidarity with Ukraine in all spheres. Political, economic, security, military as well.
Another question coming from someone in our Scowcroft Center, Robbie Grammer. What role would you like to see NATO, the NATO alliance, play in resolving the crisis in your country right now? And then I'll close with a question on sanctions if your time allows.
I will say that putting aside very concrete spheres of our cooperation with the North Atlantic Alliance, let me say that the issue that these developments, these ongoing developments, they have produced another question that we have to think about. How can we all ensure the European security in the 21st century? How can we ensure strong American Euro-Atlantic alliance and ties in order to protect our security and peace? How can we ensure the security for our nations and for our citizens? I do believe that we can ensure it together, because there is no nation that can do it alone. That's why we have to think about more strong ties, or to think about stronger ties, stronger cooperation, and further steps to ensure our common security, common ideals, common values, and common stance against any threat that comes from those who do not want to fulfill the basic principles of the international law, United Nations Charter, and fundamental principles of cooperation between nations.
So let me close, Mr. Minister, with two questions that capture the economic aspect of this. One is the issue of sanctions. Chancellor Merkel was here standing by President Obama, where the two leaders spoke of moving on to the next tier of sectoral sanctions, if you will, targeting the energy sector, banking sectors more broadly in Russia, contingent on whether Russia plays a disruptive role for the May 25th election. What's your sense? What's your response to that Western policy? Is that the right trigger? Is that the right connection? How does Putin's comments feed into this week in terms of what comes next on the cost to Russia angle? And related to that, we have a question from the Wroclaw Global Forum over Twitter, asking what can government and business do in a positive way to support the Ukrainian government? So answer the negative on sanctions and the positive on economic and business support for the government today.
Great. Speaking about sanctions and speaking about pressure, because as we speak about sanctions, we speak about pressure against the threat, our common pressure. I will tell you that the statements made yesterday in Moscow, these statements demonstrate that there are first results of consolidated international pressure on the Kremlin in response to the aggression committed against Ukraine. It means that we are moving in the right direction, and we have to strengthen these abilities and these capabilities, because we have to see results, and all our efforts should be result-oriented in this sphere. It means that if Russia does not change its policies, further steps should be taken to ensure more sanctions, more pressure, in order to get them back to the civilized dialogue with other nations, because we have to stop this threat. Absolutely, and this is very clear step. We cannot relax. We cannot think that this kind of conflict will disappear somehow, someday, with our efforts. I'm saying about Ukraine, but absolutely it's clear that we are not speaking about Ukraine itself. We are speaking about the international order, the whole international community. We all are threatened. That's why this is not the matter of some speculations or some predictions or something of that kind. That's a matter, that's a point, that's a thing of our common strong effort against the unbelievable logics of the Cold War era or whatever of 19th century style politics. So it means that we have right now a chance to change our strategies, unfortunately, and that this is not our common fault. So no mea culpa phenomena to be kept in our minds. But there is another very important thing. We have to look at our political, economic strategies with regard to Russia as well, and to rethink them in order to protect our perspectives and future. In this sense, I will tell you a thing which may sound like a paradox, but the sanctions against the threat may be the best investment in our future, because this investment may also help Russia to change those very dangerous tendencies that unfortunately prevail among Russian leaders and leadership. So that's about sanctions. Speaking about business climate and conditions for investments in Ukraine. That's our homework to be done. And that's the point I'm saying at our meeting and trying to put this message to the attention of the cabinet. That this is our principal homework to change that very dangerous traditions that that were so deeply rooted in Ukraine. This negative traditions of corruption, of compromises with market economy and so on. We have to simply to clean this field. We have a great chance to build a new and strong country, and that's my point that I'm trying to say everywhere while speaking here in Kyiv, in Ukraine. We have a great chance to build new, strong country because this nation deserves it. And our passion and our will may be the best thing to offer, to say about Ukraine to the world, and to ensure others to trust Ukraine, to believe in Ukraine, and come here and see what's going on here, because this land is a great one. as well as all other countries and nations that I love so much. So, Damon, that's a great pleasure to answer your questions.
Deputy Foreign Minister Lubkivsky, thank you very much for your time. We've heard from you today the importance in your portfolio of getting out the truth as part of this conflict as it plays out. And in that regard, your argument that the world should know that Ukraine is not in a civil war but is facing Russian aggression, that the government will not tolerate a separatist referendum this weekend in the Donbass, and that you believe that international pressure is beginning to pay dividends on Putin, and that at the end of the day, sanctions themselves, ironically, may be the best investment in Ukraine's future. Those are important points. Thank you for sharing those with us and our viewers. We will continue this series of conversations with decision makers from Ukraine so that we can put our international audience in touch directly with those of you in the heart of the struggle and the heart of the debate in Ukraine itself. If you have ideas for other speakers, other ideas, please send them to us at #ACUkraine or press@atlanticcouncil.org. And with that, let me thank you, Mr. Minister, for giving us your valuable time during this crisis period for your country. Thank you so much.
I do thank you. Great pleasure.
All right. All the best to our audience as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We'll be back.
Thank you very much.